it's time to thin our seedlings and also to up pot some of them. So we're going to be going over that today. We have been growing different types of seedlings in different types of pots. So I'm going to show you an example from each group so that you can see how I thin each type of plant and how I up pot certain plants that need to be up potted at this time. We're going to start with tomatoes. So the tomatoes I did sow with 4 seeds per container, and I had really good germination rates in the plastic pots and not as good germination rates in the peat pots, but not nearly as much growth in the peat pots. So these are all coming out of the peat pots. They're going to move to plastic pots, so I'll show you that. And the ones in the plastic pots are going to be thinned down to 1 tomato plant per pot. There are tomato roots that are starting to grow out the bottom of this pot. So I am going to be moving these seedlings into larger pots. So I did pick up some solo cups that I'm going to be moving some of these plants into, and that way they will have quite a bit more space for their root growth. Before I can put them in these pots, I do need to place a drainage hole in here to allow the water to drain out the bottom so that the roots don't get waterlogged. To do that, I'm going to use a trick I learned from Jessica at Roots and Refuge Farm, where her husband Maya just drilled a hole with a drill bit down into the solo cups. And so that gives you the drainage hole at the bottom. Okay, so this was a 30 pack, so we have 30 of these solo cups that we can use for our tomato plants. So I have filled up these solo cups with moist potting soil, and I'm going to take these 4 tomato seedlings. I planted 4 seeds, 4 seedlings popped up, so that is a 100% germination rate, which is great for these San Marzano seeds. And I am going to attempt to separate these 4 tomato plants in order to plant them in 4 separate solo cups to give them the opportunity to really grow their root system in the solo cup before we plant them outside in the garden. So you want to make sure that your tomato plants are about 3 to 4 inches before you actually transplant them to another pot or try to separate them. So these at this point are plenty big enough. And to do so, I'm going to remove the soil and the plants together from this pot, and I'm going to gently tease them apart by gently pulling on the leaves at the top and gently separating the roots from each other. And then I'm going to take a pencil and use that to make a hole right down the center of the soil in the solo cup, so that way I can place these tomato plants down in there. Now with tomato plants, you can bury part of the stem because a tomato plant will actually grow roots from their stems here, up here, if you plant them down in soil. And that's going to also help stabilize them when they get tall like this. So let's get started. So I'm just going to gently squeeze the sides of the pot to get them to come out. And you can see all of the root systems that are all surrounding the pot. These are in need of being separated and into bigger pots. So I'm going to grab the top of the leaves of this one over here, and I'm going to gently massage the root system around it because there's a lot of roots going on. And then I'm just gently pulling this out so that all you have is its individual root ball. And then use my pencil, poke a hole down in the middle. Now I don't want these leaves touching the soil, so I'm just gonna bury it to just below those leaves there. I'm going to use my pencil to help. And because it's the same tomato plants, I can use some of the extra soil from that other pot to pack around it, just to make sure I've got nice coverage. And the soil's already moist, so I don't have to water it. And voila, you have a replanted tomato seedling, the San Marzano, and instead of being 4 inches high, it's now about 2 inches high. And this will give it the opportunity to really fill out its roots and to grow tall again. And then we still have these 3 here, and so I'm gonna do the same thing. Each one, I'm gonna tease the base to help loosen up the soil around it because of all the root systems. Just gently, very gently massaging. I'm gonna grab the leaves at the very top and just gently tease it away from the other tomato plants. And so if you look, there's some pretty good sized roots, nice root ball on this tall tomato seedling. So either using the pencil or your finger, make that nice deep well in the middle of your cup. And then you're going to drop the seedling into that well and then gently fill the soil in around it. Gently pat it down. And you can use some of that extra soil from the original potted plant around it to build the soil up a little higher. And then you have another plant. So we have the last 2. And we are going to grab by the leaves again, massage the base, and then gently tease them apart so that you have the last 2 root balls. And they both have nice root systems, so they should do well. Make a nice little hole in the middle and pop them in. So now all 4 of those tomato plants that were in the original small cup are now planted in 4 solo cups. All that's left is to place an individual label in each of these, or you can write directly on the solo cup. And then we're going to repeat that for this entire tray of tomato plants. Now in these peat pots where the tomato plants are still really small, I'm actually going to transfer these into a small pot like these because the root systems are not nearly as developed as these other ones. So I will be moving them to these smaller pots in the hopes that I can get the root system to grow a bit and start growing the top more. Once the roots are coming out of the bottom of one of these pots, then I can either up pot them. But considering our last frost date is coming up in just over a week, they're likely going to just go from here, get hardened off, and then move into the garden. This may be their final pot. These tomato plants, being only a couple inches tall, are smaller than I'd like them to be for transplanting to a new pot, but this has been over a month, the same amount of time that this tomato plant has been growing, and it's just not thriving in this pot. And so unfortunately, it has to be moved earlier to another pot, and I am hopeful that they will make the transplant okay and then really thrive in a plastic pot. But I've been waiting a couple weeks hoping that these would grow just a bit bigger so that I could transplant them, and they're really not making much in the way of growth. So it's just time that we just get them out of these peat pots.
Mom, look at this seed ball. This is a big seed ball.
Oh yeah.
And sturdy.
You're really good at this.
That's because you taught me, Mom. You're the best teacher.
Oh, thanks.
Could I have some more soil over here? Oh, you're helping me.
Always.
That's because you're the best mom in the whole world.
Thank you.
I love planting seeds with you, Mommy.
I love it too.
Mom, is it okay if some of the little roots get in the soil?
Yes, as long as it's the same variety of roots.
Oh, nice. Oh, that's nice. Kind of like you and me. We have the same roots.
Yep. Now with the ones in these peat pots, there are some like this here where the seeds were planted close together, and there's 3 right here. 2 of them, the leaves are wilted, and 1, the leaf is okay. So I'm going to cut these 2 where the leaves are wilting at the top. I'm going to cut those off at the base, and I'm going to keep this one and plant it. So I'm just going to cut them off at the soil line. And then this single tomato plant, which is a beefsteak tomato, that's going to get planted into the 4-cell tray. And then I'm just going to repeat that as needed with the other ones. And we no longer need this peat pot. All right, we have the San Marzano and the beefsteak tomatoes in the solo cups here. So I'm gonna move these to the greenhouse. Now I started doing the transplanting of all these tomato plants in the evening because I do want to give them a chance to rest overnight without the intensity of the sun. Just to give them a chance to rest overnight in darkness, and then when the sun comes up tomorrow, hopefully they'll be a bit more settled at that point. Okay, so all of these here are from the peat pots, and they've been transferred, so hopefully they will do okay with their transplanting. They're so tiny. I'm gonna get these into the greenhouse. I gotta say, these little smaller tomato seedlings were easier to transplant than the larger ones just because of the size of the root systems. So I would recommend, if you're going to transplant your tomato seedlings, to go somewhere in between these 2 in size. So while these are about 4 inches high and these are just 2 inches, maybe go closer to that 3 inch and probably have an easy time transplanting for an ideal condition. All right, let's do some Roma tomatoes. I find that they're coming apart so easily, and even though that they are close together, as long as they're not wilted at the top, I'm keeping them and not cutting them. All right, we finished putting all the tomato plants from the peat pots into plastic containers. So we're gonna put these in the greenhouse. Honestly, looking at the plants that I have here, I'm going to keep these plants as is. We've got kale and we've got some broccoli in here, some oregano, different types of basil, but everything is fairly small, and with only about a week to go, I'm comfortable with leaving them in these pots rather than up potting them. And I would say really there's only two that I feel like I need to thin, which would be the eggplants here. So I'm going to separate the eggplants into some additional pots here. So similar to like what we did with the tomatoes, I'm going to add some soil to my pots. This is the Black Beauty eggplant. I'm going to tease it out. I'm going to take the whole block out of the pot, and then I am going to, the soil feels pretty loose, so I'm just going to grab the leaves at the top and gently tease this out. This is quite the root ball, so I'm going to use my finger to make a nice deep hole in this pot here. Drop it on in. And they're not that tall in height, so I'm not gonna bury the stem on this. And there we go. We've got a Black Beauty eggplant. Now I did place 4 seeds in here and 4 seeds germinated. So we're just gonna separate them into 4 different pots. Another one here. And then we'll label each pot. I ran out of popsicle sticks and I ran out of the little dollar store tags. So I'm gonna cut up some aluminum. This also makes for great little labels for plants. I just cut out small strips. I can write on them with Sharpie and then stick them into the pots as little markers to identify each plant. Like that, and use a Sharpie, and I'll label it as a Black Beauty eggplant. Once it's labeled, I can just slip it right behind there, and then it has its label. Now all of this in this tray here, this is all lettuce, assorted lettuce. And some of the seeds germinated 100% in some of them, whereas in others there was no germination. And then in some completely dried out plants. So I want to take out all the lettuce from each of these pots and switch them from peat pots into a plastic pot. But honestly, I'm not going to thin them because they're all small and I'd like them to make a nice cluster of lettuce because most of these I'll be using as salad cuttings rather than heads of lettuce. So it's just a matter of switching the plants and soils from one to the other. And we'll start with the Butter Crunch lettuce. So with that, it was just a simple transfer, and then I'm just gonna gently pack the soil back in around each of the lettuces here. Put the label back in there. And then I'm just gonna keep doing that for the rest of these. So that way they all are in these little white pots. Okay, and then for cucumbers. So cucumbers, they do not like to be disturbed. They don't like their roots disturbed. I try not to do any transplanting or upplanting, which is why I planted them in larger pots to begin with, and they have grown. They are growing nice and tall, and they're in these individual pots. Not all of these pots had germination. Down here, these are all single cucumber plants, but we did have one cucumber plant that I accidentally dropped 2 seeds into the same hole. So these stems are coming out of the same section in here. And so our options here are, I can cut one of these down so that only the one grows, or I can attempt to transplant and split them. Now, one doesn't look stronger than the other. They both look great. However, if I were to try to separate them, I could end up losing both of these. And since I've got plenty of cucumber plants here, I'm just going to cut one of these down at the base and allow the other one to grow without competition. And then that's it for these. They're gonna stay in these pots for another week or so before they're transplanted outside into the garden. Okay, that brings us over to watermelons. Now the watermelons, we had pretty good germination here. I did place 2 seeds in each tray, and honestly most of the pots have 2 seedlings that came up. The pots that have 2 seedlings in each, I'm going to switch one seedling over to another one. I did start the watermelons later than the other plants. That's why they're not huge. So I'm going to just transplant them into a similar size pot or a little bit bigger depending on availability, because I know that in just over a week I'm going to be transplanting them outside. So if they were going to be inside for longer than that, then I would definitely up pot all of these into larger pots. I do have some larger pots that I'm going to transplant some of the watermelons into to give them more space to grow, because I do have some in these smaller ones and I definitely see that they need more space. There's some roots coming out below here, and so these will be getting transferred into larger pots, while some of the single stem watermelons will stay in this pot here, just based on availability, how much space I have. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to switch my marker over. I'm going to pop the soil out of the cell. I'm going to make a hole in the center of the pot with my finger. I'm going to grab by the leaves at the top and gently pull up, and see this beautiful root system? I'm going to drop that down into the bottom of this pot. Give it plenty of room to grow. And I'm going to gently but firmly press the soil down around it to give us one watermelon plant in this pot. And then I'm going to repeat that with this pot and this second watermelon plant. And I'm going to slide down in here, and then I'll write a label for this one here. And those are sugar baby watermelons. And then to speed this along, last but not least, is our cantaloupe. Now the cantaloupe I have in larger pots of varying sizes, so I am happy with the pot size. However, some of them had 2 seeds germinate, and so I do want to switch out the ones with 2 seeds that have germinated and give them their own pot. So in this case, this seed did not germinate, so this honey rock cantaloupe will get moved into this pot, which should have had a Hal's Best cantaloupe come up, but it did not. So I'm going to switch one of these over to this one. Now in this case, I'm just going to grab the top of the leaves here. I'm going to loosen the soil around it inside the pot because this is such a big pot. And I'm just going to take the root ball here and drop it into the hole I'm making in the next pot. And place a new label in this one. And the rest of these germinated, so I just need, let's see, 1, 2, 3 more pots to be able to have a single cantaloupe in each one of these. So I'll grab another pot, and I'm gonna do the same thing with these Hal's Best cantaloupe here, so that you just get the root ball. And that cantaloupe will have plenty of room in this pot to really extend its root system. And there you have it. Those are just examples of how I go about thinning and repotting the different types of plants that I grow in my garden. So everything that I showed you, I'm going to be doing for all of the plants here. And by the time I'm done, both of these greenhouses here are going to be chock full of seedlings in their own pots, awaiting their last week or so of growing indoors. And then, weather permitting, we'll be hardening them off and getting them ready to go out into the garden. So thanks for joining me today, and if you have any questions, leave them down below in the comments. And if you have questions about starting seeds, I did make a video called Step-by-Step Guide to Starting Seeds, and that has a lot of great information on how to get started with planting seeds. And if you haven't started your farm yet, what are you waiting for? Get your farm on.
1, 2, 3, 4. Do you want to farm? A wicked awesome farm. Watch this channel to learn what to do. We love to farm and we'll show you. Yeah, welcome to our show.